Hello, resilient Scorpio. Some of the most important turning points in your life were never the ones that drew attention. They happened quietly beneath the surface, in moments when something inside you could have fallen apart. Yet instead you chose to keep moving forward without anyone realizing a choice had even been made. People may remember your calm expression or your remarkable self-control, but very few have ever stopped to wonder what it took to protect that quiet strength. Over time, you may discover that your greatest achievement was never a single victory, but the countless unseen transformations that shaped who you are today. Many people describe Scorpio as mysterious, composed, or emotionally powerful, as though those qualities simply appeared on their own. Yet what if that steady presence has always been the result of learning, far too early, how to carry emotions that were too heavy to express out loud? What if the silence you mastered was never emptiness, but a place where old fears, disappointments, and unanswered questions slowly changed form until they became something you could live with? That kind of strength rarely announces itself because it grows where no one else is looking. Imagine an underground river flowing beneath layers of stone. From above, the landscape seems solid and unchanged, but beneath the surface, the current is always moving, carving new paths through rock one quiet moment at a time. You are far more like that hidden current than you may realize. Throughout your life, you have learned to sense emotional shifts before they fully reach the surface, recognizing unspoken truths long before anyone dared to say them aloud. This isn't simply intuition. It's a way of surviving that developed over years of adapting to what could not be controlled. From an early age, you may have discovered that revealing everything you felt wasn't always safe. Instead, you learn to hold intense emotions carefully, allowing them to settle deep inside while the outside world continued as if nothing had changed. That ability has often been mistaken for emotional distance or exceptional composure. In reality, it has required enormous energy because containing powerful feelings demands far more strength than most people ever recognize. Even the deepest river leaves signs when its current begins to change. There are quiet moments when you feel unusually tired without understanding why, when you long to step away from everything for reasons you struggle to explain, or when an invisible heaviness settles over you despite nothing appearing wrong from the outside. You may have called those moments stress, exhaustion, or simply a difficult season. But perhaps there was something more important. Perhaps they were gentle reminders that transformation also asks for rest, and that constantly holding yourself together is not the same as allowing yourself to heal. Still, you continued moving forward, not because life demanded perfection, and not because you were incapable of asking for help, but because somewhere along the way you developed an extraordinary capacity to rebuild yourself after every unseen storm. Think about how many versions of yourself have quietly disappeared over the years, each one making room for the next without applause or recognition. The world may only see the person standing before it today, yet only you know how many silent endings made that person possible. There is a kind of resilience that rarely receives a name. It isn't measured by how much pain someone can tolerate, but by how many times they can release what no longer belongs to them and still remain open to becoming someone new. That process is never effortless. It leaves traces in your weariness, your moments of withdrawal, and your occasional desire to disappear long enough to hear your own thoughts again. The real question isn't whether you are strong enough to endure another season of change. It's whether you have begun to notice the quiet signals, reminding you that your own inner world deserves the same care you've always given to surviving it. If these reflections feel unexpectedly familiar, don't dismiss them too quickly. Sometimes the first step toward healing isn't solving the problem immediately. Sometimes it's simply recognizing that what you've carried in silence finally has a name, and allowing yourself the space to become something new without believing you have failed the person you used to be. If these thoughts are stirring something inside you, don't let that feeling pass unnoticed. Some moments of recognition arrive quietly, and if we move past them too quickly, they slip beneath the surface again before we truly understand what they were trying to show us. Before we continue, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. When was the last time you stayed composed while quietly carrying an emotional weight that no one around you ever realized was there? Real transformation rarely arrives without leaving subtle signs first. Long before anything truly falls apart, your inner world begins whispering that something needs your attention. For Scorpio, those whispers often appear in ways that are easy to dismiss. A sudden desire to withdraw from everyone, an exhaustion that sleep doesn't seem to touch, or an unexpected irritation that feels strangely disconnected from whatever happened that day. They seem insignificant on their own, yet together they often tell a much deeper story. Over time, you may have convinced yourself that these moments simply mean you're tired, overwhelmed, or having an off week. But what if they are something far more meaningful? What if they are your inner self asking for space before another layer of your old identity becomes too heavy to carry? The truth is that emotional transformation doesn't begin with dramatic collapse. More often, it begins with quiet signals that ask to be noticed long before they become impossible to ignore. Picture an underground river flowing beneath solid ground. From the surface, everything appears stable, unchanged, almost effortless. Yet beneath the earth, the current is constantly reshaping the landscape, wearing away old stone and creating entirely new paths. Your emotional life often works the same way. The changes that define you rarely happen where others can see them, but that doesn't make them any less real. You know better than most what it feels like to move through an ordinary day while something deep inside is shifting. To everyone else, you seem composed, focused, perhaps even unusually calm. Only you know how much quiet effort it sometimes takes to keep moving while old emotions are asking to be released. That doesn't mean you're fragile. It means you learned long ago how to function in the middle of emotional intensity without letting it define your outward life. But surviving a difficult season and living permanently in survival mode are not the same thing. One builds resilience, the other slowly convinces you that constant emotional pressure is simply normal. Perhaps one of the greatest lessons you've been learning all along is recognizing the difference before your spirit grows too weary from carrying what no longer belongs to you. Think about how often these quiet warnings have appeared in disguise. Maybe it was canceling plans you had genuinely looked forward to because you suddenly needed silence more than company. Maybe it was reacting strongly to something small when the real weight had been building for weeks. Or perhaps it was choosing silence, not because you had nothing to say, but because you no longer had the energy to explain everything happening beneath the surface. These moments rarely arrive with clear labels. They hide behind everyday explanations like stress, fatigue, or a temporary emotional slump. Sometimes those explanations are accurate, but if you look closely, you may notice a pattern. These feelings often emerge after you've spent too long holding together parts of yourself that have quietly been asking to change. Nature constantly reveals what it needs through subtle signals. The forest begins changing long before the first leaves fall. The tide shifts before the shoreline ever looks different. Your inner world works in much the same way. It has always been sending gentle messages before asking for something larger. You have become remarkably skilled at sensing what other people leave unspoken. You notice changes in energy, emotions, and intentions with an intuition that often surprises even you. Yet that same awareness has not always been turned inward. You have spent years reading the emotional landscape around you while overlooking the quieter messages rising from within your own heart. Learning to recognize your own limits before emotional exhaustion takes over is not a sign that you've become less resilient. If anything, it may be one of the deepest forms of wisdom Scorpio can develop. The courage to transform has never depended on enduring endless pressure. Sometimes it begins with something much quieter, the willingness to finally listen to yourself with the same depth and compassion you've always offered to the unseen parts of everyone else. This is where your path begins to change. Real growth doesn't ask you to become someone capable of carrying even more emotional weight. Instead, it quietly teaches you to recognize the moment when perseverance has stopped helping you grow and has begun asking too much of your spirit. That distinction is easy to miss, especially for someone who has spent so much of life believing that surviving another difficult season is simply what you're supposed to do. When endurance becomes familiar, it can disguise itself as purpose, making it difficult to recognize when the strength that once protected you has quietly begun asking for more than it should. For people who carry their deepest emotions in silence, This awareness often arrives much later than it should, not because they lack wisdom, but because they rarely pause long enough to notice what their inner world has been trying to say. The quietest voices are often the easiest to overlook, especially when life keeps rewarding you for appearing composed. Sometimes clarity doesn't arrive as a dramatic revelation. Sometimes it begins with the simple realization that the version of yourself you've been protecting no longer needs to carry every burden alone. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough is not discovering something new, but finally believing what your heart has been whispering for years. There is something quietly misunderstood about the way you move through the world. Others often see your composure, your loyalty, or your ability to remain steady through emotional storms. What they don't see is that this calm can sometimes become a kind of armor, not to hide your heart from others, but to protect it while it continues doing difficult work beneath the surface. You have learned to process change internally, allowing very little of the struggle to reach the outside world. Over time, that armor becomes so familiar that even you can forget there is still a living, changing heart beneath it, one that longs not only to survive, but also to breathe freely again. One of your greatest gifts is that you rarely fall apart in obvious ways. Instead of collapsing all at once, you adapt. You shift your emotional energy, tuck old wounds into quieter places, and keep moving forward as though nothing has changed. It's an extraordinary survival instinct, one that has carried you through seasons that might have overwhelmed someone else. You have an almost instinctive ability to reinvent yourself without asking anyone to witness the process. But every hidden adjustment asks something in return, and little by little, those unseen costs begin to accumulate. The energy spent quietly rebuilding yourself after each emotional storm eventually becomes its own invisible weight. Like a river carving through stone over countless years, emotional strain doesn't always announce itself with a single dramatic moment. More often, it reshapes your inner landscape so gradually that you don't notice the change until you realize parts of yourself have grown tired in ways you can't quite explain. What once felt effortless begins requiring more intention. Conversations that used to energize you begin leaving you drained. Outwardly, life may still appear stable. Inwardly, you've been spending energy simply maintaining what no longer feels entirely true. It isn't that you've become weaker. It's that your inner world has been asking for renewal long before your mind was ready to acknowledge it. That raises an uncomfortable but deeply important question. How long can you keep adapting to pressure before you begin exploring the source of it? There are forms of exhaustion that don't arrive with tears or dramatic endings. They appear quietly, almost invisibly, as warmth fading from a relationship, inspiration slowly disappearing from work that once excited you, or a growing sense that you're living from habit instead of genuine connection. Sometimes they appear as a feeling that you've outgrown a chapter of your life without yet knowing what comes next. Those moments are rarely signs that you've failed. More often, they are invitations to evolve. These changes are rarely caused by one defining event. More often, they reflect years of quietly postponing your own emotional renewal while continuing to move forward. Each postponed conversation with yourself leaves a small imprint that gradually shapes your inner landscape. You become so skilled at surviving that you forget transformation requires more than endurance. It also asks for release. It asks you to trust that letting go of what no longer serves you is not losing part of yourself, but making space for the person you are still becoming. There is an important difference between knowing you have the strength to carry difficult emotions and believing you must carry them forever without support. The first is resilience. The second is a belief that can quietly shape your life without you ever choosing it. No one may have spoken those expectations aloud, yet they settle into your identity through countless subtle experiences until they begin to feel like truth. Over time, that belief can become so familiar that you mistake constant emotional responsibility for your natural role, forgetting that strength was never meant to become isolation. Perhaps people have often admired your ability to remain composed, to recover quickly, or to find your footing after every emotional storm. Those observations may have sounded encouraging, but repeated often enough, they can become an invisible expectation. that you'll always be the one who quietly finds a way through no matter what you're carrying inside. Without realizing it, you may begin performing that version of yourself simply because everyone has come to expect it. Over time, you may begin measuring your own worth by how little of your struggle anyone else can see. Yet some of the strongest people are not those who hide every wound, but those who recognize when healing deserves as much attention as endurance. Yet healing asks a different question altogether. Instead of asking how much longer you can endure, it asks what part of you has been waiting for permission to change. It gently invites you to notice the places where you've outgrown old fears, old identities, or old ways of protecting yourself. Addressing the source of emotional heaviness is not another responsibility to add to your life. It is an invitation to let your inner strength become something that nourishes you instead of existing only to protect everyone around you. The same resilience that once helped you survive can now become the foundation for living with greater freedom. Many people spend years rebuilding themselves after each difficult chapter, without ever stopping to ask whether they deserve the same compassion they freely extend to others. They become experts at understanding everyone else's pain while quietly overlooking their own. When that question finally surfaces, it can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But it also marks the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. One built not only on resilience, but on honesty. And honesty, when paired with self-compassion, often becomes the doorway through which genuine transformation finally enters. There comes a point in almost every life when the instinct to protect yourself slowly transforms into the instinct to close yourself off completely. After enough disappointment, enough emotional intensity, and enough silent rebuilding, it becomes tempting to believe that feeling less is the safest path forward. At first, emotional distance can resemble strength. It creates the illusion that nothing can reach you deeply enough to hurt you again. Yet every wall that keeps pain outside can also prevent joy, trust, and genuine connection from finding their way back in. Yet nature tells a different story. The oldest trees survive fierce storms, not because they refuse to move, but because they bend with the wind. Rivers continue shaving mountains because they keep flowing instead of becoming stone. Seasons themselves remind us that every ending quietly prepares the ground for another beginning. Lasting resilience has never been about becoming emotionally unbreakable. It has always been about remaining alive enough to keep changing, trusting that movement is not the opposite of strength, but one of its purest expressions. You have probably experimented with becoming a harder version of yourself at some point. Perhaps you stopped sharing your feelings, convinced yourself you no longer needed anyone, or tried to silence the parts of your heart that still hoped, trusted, and cared deeply. Perhaps you believe that if nothing touched you, nothing could wound you. For a while, it may even have felt like protection. But sooner or later, you likely discovered that the version of yourself built entirely from emotional walls required just as much energy to maintain as the pain you were trying to escape. And somewhere beneath those carefully built defenses, the part of you that had always known how to heal patiently waited, not asking you to become someone different, but simply inviting you to become fully yourself once again. Perhaps you've already discovered something that was difficult to explain, even to yourself. Every time you tried to become completely untouchable, completely closed off, something inside you seemed to lose its natural rhythm. The harder you worked to silence your emotions, the more exhausting it became to carry them. Somewhere along the way, you realized that pretending not to feel was never the same as becoming stronger. It only postponed conversations your heart would eventually ask you to have. Feelings that are ignored rarely disappear. They simply wait in quieter places until life creates another moment where they can finally be heard. Your resilience was never found in becoming stone. It has always lived in your willingness to remain alive through every season of change. Like a river that keeps flowing around every obstacle instead of trying to shatter it. Your strength has always come from allowing life to move through you without letting it erase who you are. Even when the current became rough, it reshaped you without taking away your essence. That isn't coincidence, and it certainly isn't luck. It is the result of countless quiet decisions to keep growing when no one else could see the battle taking place within you. Those unseen choices accumulated over years, gradually becoming the foundation of the person you are today. There is something beautifully simple about this truth. The more you tried to prove your strength by refusing to bend, the closer you came to breaking under your own expectations. Yet every time you allowed grief, hope, fear, or love to move through your heart instead of imprisoning them behind walls, you emerged more complete than before. Every emotion became less of an enemy and more of a teacher, revealing something about what mattered most to you. Real resilience has never been about resisting every emotion. It has always been about trusting that you can experience them without losing yourself, knowing that every difficult feeling eventually becomes part of your wisdom rather than a threat to your identity. This is where symbolism and psychology quietly meet. What some people mistake for Scorpio's intensity is often a remarkable instinct for transformation. Deep within you exists an understanding that survival is not the same as stagnation. You have always sensed, even if only unconsciously, that healing requires movement. Just as forests renew themselves after fire and oceans reshape every shoreline with each returning tide, your spirit has always known that change is part of remaining whole. The parts of you that seemed to disappear were often making room for something stronger, quieter, and far more authentic to emerge. Think about the moments when others encouraged you to become colder, more detached, or less affected by the world around you. They may have believed that emotional distance was the safest path. Perhaps they mistook vulnerability for risk and numbness for stability. But if you had completely abandoned your capacity to feel, how many meaningful connections would have quietly disappeared? How many opportunities for growth would have passed unnoticed because you chose certainty instead of honesty? Sometimes the very sensitivity people misunderstand is what protects the most valuable parts of your life. It is also what allows you to recognize truth beneath appearances, even when words fail to express it. Your greatest challenge has never been learning how to survive. You've already proven that countless times. The deeper challenge is discovering who you are beyond the version of yourself built entirely around endurance. There comes a moment when survival can no longer be the only story you tell yourself. Eventually, your inner world begins asking for something gentler, for a life shaped not only by resilience but also by peace. A life where your identity is defined not by everything you endured, but by everything you allowed yourself to become because of it. Many people spend years confusing emotional self-protection with emotional strength. They become so accustomed to carrying everything in silence that they forget there is another way to live. Silence becomes familiar, and familiarity can easily disguise itself as safety. Yet transformation begins the moment you stop measuring your value by how much pain you can quietly endure and start recognizing that your own healing deserves the same attention you've always given to simply making it through. Choosing to care for yourself is not abandoning your resilience. It is allowing that resilience to evolve into something healthier. There is a quiet beauty in the way nature transforms. No one watches the exact moment a snake leaves behind its old skin or the instant an underground seed begins pushing toward the light. These changes happen slowly, beyond ordinary sight, yet they shape everything that follows. Seasons never rush their own unfolding, and neither does genuine healing. The most meaningful transformations are rarely dramatic. They unfold in silence, one unseen moment at a time, until one day the landscape looks completely different, even though every small change seemed almost invisible when it first began. In many ways, your own life has followed that same rhythm. You are not who you were a year ago, or 5 years ago, or even yesterday. Each difficult experience has asked you to release something that could no longer travel with you. Sometimes it was an old fear. Sometimes it was an expectation you had placed upon yourself. Every disappointment, every recovery, every quiet decision to begin again has become another layer of the person you are still becoming. None of those experiences were wasted, even the ones that once felt impossible to understand. When you look back, your greatest test was probably never a single heartbreak, a single loss, or one defining moment that changed everything. It was the accumulation of countless ordinary days when no one realized how much inner work was taking place beneath your calm exterior. It was choosing patience when frustration would have been easier, hope when cynicism seemed safer, and compassion when disappointment tempted you to close your heart. Again and again, you chose growth instead of surrender, honesty instead of emotional numbness, and hope instead of permanent withdrawal. Those choices rarely received recognition, yet they shaped your life more than any dramatic event ever could, because they quietly changed the person making them. Perhaps it's time to honor that journey for what it truly is. Not as proof that you can endure endless hardship, but as evidence that your heart has remained open enough to transform without losing its essence. There is extraordinary courage in continuing to believe in growth after seasons that invited you to stop believing altogether. That quiet resilience is far rarer than it appears, and it deserves your own acknowledgement before it ever seeks anyone else's. The recognition you have been waiting for may begin with the way you choose to see yourself. There is a profound difference between a mountain that never changes and a river that continues carving its path through the landscape. One simply stands where it has always stood. The other creates life wherever it flows, reshaping everything it touches while remaining true to its own nature. Rivers do not lose themselves because they change direction. They discover new ways to continue their journey. Your spirit has always resembled the river far more than the mountain. It has endured because it continued moving, adapting, releasing, and beginning again, finding strength not in resisting change, but in growing alongside it. If this moment offers you anything, let it be this gentle reminder: you do not have to stop being the deeply feeling person you've always been. Your capacity to care has never been your weakness, and your emotional depth has never been something that needed to be hidden in order to be valuable. What deserves your attention now is not becoming harder, but becoming kinder toward the parts of yourself that have carried so much in silence. You have already passed more invisible tests than you realize, not by denying your emotions, but by allowing them to transform you without destroying you. That is a strength few people ever learn to recognize, even within themselves. Perhaps the next chapter asks something different, not greater endurance, not stronger walls, simply the courage to care for your own inner world with the same patience, devotion, and compassion that has carried you through every quiet transformation that brought you here. As you continue forward, that compassion may become the very force that allows your next transformation to feel less like survival and more like coming home to the truest version of yourself.